We've been getting treated to more and more retro games on the PS5 here lately, and one of the most recent examples of this is Secret Agent Clank from the very well-acclaimed Ratchet & Clank series. Now, this is one game that is a little bit more controversial in the franchise, so does it deserve all the criticism it gets? Let's get into it. Now, as a lot of you who are watching this video probably know, Ratchet & Clank has a high reputation for usually having really good gameplay. Ratchet & Clank has a gameplay formula that has resonated with many people, and basically, if you're playing a Ratchet & Clank game, that's probably one of the big reasons you're there, and it's pretty standard across all the games to have a certain level of quality, or it's at least standard amongst almost all of them, as there are a few of them that kind of dip below the quality line, at least according to most fans. And there are a lot of fans who believe Secret Agent Clank is one of those titles. I think for what it is, this game has a pretty good presentation, at least on the surface level. When you consider that this is a PSP game, which means that there had to be a lot of differences from the console games, I think they kind of translated the Ratchet & Clank gameplay pretty well to this format. Of course, they already did this previously with Size Matters, and Secret Agent Clank pretty much takes everything Size Matters does and continues it, but Secret Agent Clank is impressive enough for what it is. It keeps the same graphical style of your classic Ratchet & Clank console game, but it's just maybe a little bit less detailed because, of course, the PSP is less powerful than the PS2 was. That being said, this game wasn't without its problems, so let's get into the game itself.
The version we're reviewing today is the PS5 version of Secret Agent Clank, and for those of you who don't know, the PS5 uses Sony-made emulators to run PS1, PS2, and PSP games, so they're not native ports. Technically, there was a PS2 version of the game back in the day, but it's a good thing they decided to emulate the PSP version instead, since the PSP emulator on PS5 does a much better job of scaling games than the PS2 emulator does. It's also a pretty well-known fact that the PS2 version of Secret Agent Clank was notoriously more buggy than the PSP version. So this version on the PS5, which is the emulated PSP version, is definitely the best way to play the game. Our story begins with a gem known as the Eye of Infinity getting stolen and Ratchet getting framed for it and sent to prison. Ratchet also seems to be wearing some sort of mind control device, as if it wasn't obvious enough already. On top of that, Ratchet takes a harsh tone and openly insults his friend. Clank, longtime friend of Ratchet, sees right through it. Ratchet's edgy behavior is so out of character. This starts off the story, which leads us to mainly playing as Clank. However, Ratchet, Quark, and the Gadgetbots also have their own segments in the game.
This game takes a slightly deeper focus on stealth, yet it also updates Clank's gameplay to be more similar to that of Ratchet in other games from the series. Previously, Clank was always a puzzle solver, but here he has a whole arsenal of weapons at his disposal. The mixture of stealth and action can be jarring at times, but it's also kind of fun. I never thought that there would be a flamethrower or bombs that Clank could throw around, but it works somehow. Clank has successfully copied Ratchet's style, and honestly, it's pretty fun at times. Many segments let you choose between blasting your way through or going in all stealth-like this is Metal Gear or something. However, that's not to say that it's without its problems. See, this game is good in ways and fun at times. However, there are a lot of problems to be had as well, and some of those are found in Clank's arsenal. While I do really like some of the weapons, like the blowtorch briefcase or the cufflink bomb, there were other weapons that were somewhat of a letdown, like the tie ring. In fact, I'll be honest, other than the blowtorch briefcase and the cufflink bomb, none of these weapons really stood out to me. I'm really glad that Clank has an arsenal of weapons that he can use in this game because it just makes sense, but a lot of the weapons that he has just don't feel impactful enough for a Ratchet & Clank game. They don't really feel like I have enough ammo in my pocket to fight an entire world war like I should feel in a Ratchet & Clank game. That being said, I'm glad there is at least two good ones here, but I really favored those two weapons. The cufflink bomb and the blowtorch briefcase were literally my go-tos in almost every situation. The only time I would even consider using the others is when I was out of ammo on those two. So, Clank has an arsenal, and that's cool. However, the bad news is that only two of the weapons out of that arsenal were actually weapons that I found fun.
Yeah, the tie ring was, quite frankly, very, very ugly. It was unnecessary. I see what they were going with, when they did the tie ring, but it didn't work in the end. I felt like I ran out of ammo a lot in this game. I thought I wasn't supposed to feel this way in a Ratchet & Clank game, and then it dawned on me that I wasn't playing as Ratchet. Even so, I didn't feel right. It didn't feel right for me to feel so bare. My pockets felt so light. It didn't suit me well. Ammo and vending machines were very sparse in the game, and I think fans of the series will agree with me when I say the game needs, in some form, a considerate amount of firepower before it's seen as a true Ratchet & Clank game. With all that aside, there were two non-explosive weapon gadget things that I really did like. One, the Holo Fist, and two, Tangle Vine Carnation. The Holo Fist was a go-to when I ran out of ammo, which happened a lot in this game. More than I would like. Yep, the Holo Fist was definitely there for me, and it did a passable job attacking at a short distance. I wasn't about to rely on the briefcase because it was too slow and the reach was too short. Better to get it over with than leave myself open to attacks. I really love the Tangle Vine Carnation. It was great for slowing down enemies. The only cons is that they're a little slow to sprout, and it's a bummer you can't throw a lot of them out at the same time. But that would be game-breaking, wouldn't it?
So, we took slightly different stances on the weapons, which, may be a little surprising to some of you, but let us know who was right in the comments. Both of us ended up feeling like there was more bad than there was good to Clank's arsenal, which is sad because the good can be really good at times, but there's more bad than there is good. I just feel like they should have focused on making this arsenal more explosive and more Ratchet & Clank-like, because the weapons are really the bread and butter of a Ratchet & Clank game. If the weapons aren't good, there's something very wrong in a Ratchet & Clank game. And I feel like that is one of this game's biggest problems.
Secret Agent Clank is for the most part an action game, but has a few stealth segments here and there. There are times you'll have to do stealth takedowns to subdue foes, or hide to slip past enemies. Clank can also generate a disguise for himself using a gadget called the Holo Monocle. The Holo Monocle sounds pretty cool, right? Well, don't get your hopes too high. The Holo Monocle is not foolproof.
The Holo Monocle is a cool ideal on paper, but I feel like it really could have been implemented into the game better. There are very few moments in the game where the Holo Monocle is actually fun or practical to use, and even in times when it is, it has one major hindrance that really makes it a lot more dull than it should be. What I'm talking about is the fact that the disguises that you can pull from the Holo Monocle work on everyone except the one enemy that you pulled it from. So if you pull a disguise from one robot and then you walk around in that disguise, every other robot will see you and think nothing of it. But if the one that you pulled the disguise from sees you, then they're going to see right through your disguise and render it useless. I understand that there's probably several ways that makes sense in terms of the story of the game, but it just kind of ruins the fun of the Holo Monocle. And I think that there's much better ways that they could have approached the challenge, like just making the stealth segments in general a lot harder, or maybe making the Holo Monocle harder to use, harder to pull disguises out with. You know, like, there's a lot of ways they could have made it harder without nerfing it in this way and completely taking the fun out of it, at least to a pretty big degree. I suppose there's still times where it's still fun, but it's not what it could be. Next up, we discuss playing as Ratchet, and in this game we already talked about how you mainly play as Clank, but there's also times where you play as Ratchet, Cork, and the Gadgetbots. Well, when you play as Ratchet, you get something much more similar to what you saw in Ratchet & Clank Size Matters. And Ratchet, I can just say right off the bat, has a better arsenal than Clank did. So, as we discussed previously, every time you play as Ratchet, it's going to be as Ratchet in prison. He got caught in the beginning of the game, as we explained previously, and now there are certain situations throughout the story where you have to play as Ratchet while he's in jail. This is mostly because he's jailed up with a bunch of criminals who he helped capture, and now they want revenge on him. So throughout this, it's basically just arena rounds where you're fighting a bunch of enemies that are coming for you, and they're usually not that hard to get through, you know, just keep blasting and eventually the segment will be over. They do get a little creative from time to time, introducing challenges like not knocking anyone's towel off in the shower. Yeah, that's unfortunately a thing. Or introducing various time limits, but for the most part, all of your Ratchet gameplay is going to be in an arena-like setting. It's fun for what it is. It gets a little repetitive for some maybe, but overall it's fun, and it's nice to be able to have some of that traditional Ratchet gameplay even within a Clank game. I think the developers knew that we all like Ratchet so much that we wanted to be able to play as him in this game, although I will say some of it is very weird and uncomfortable, especially the whole shower thing, and we'll get to that later. As for Ratchet's weaponry though, I feel like he definitely had more good stuff than Clank did. He had something called the Plasma Whip, and while that's not explosive, it is very, very nice to use. It can take out just a whole wall of enemies in a few swings, and I really like the Plasma Whip. It's a really cool weapon, and it's really satisfying to use. He also had the dual lacerators, which are rapid-firing dual pistols, which are simple, but it's fun. You know, they're simple but effective. He had the shard gun, which was essentially a shotgun-like weapon. He had the shock rocket, which was a really hard-hitting weapon, and of course he had something called the pork bomb gun, which would turn all the enemies around him into pigs, which, if you know the Ratchet and Clank series, there's usually a few gimmicky weapons here and there, and this kind of fills the slot of gimmicky and just kind of comedic. There's usually one or two weapons like that in every Ratchet and Clank game, and this is the one for this game. The pork bomb gun will probably give you a good laugh here and there. So to summarize, Ratchet's arsenal isn't perfect. He had a few that I wasn't very crazy about, like the Walloper, but I did think his arsenal was a lot better and a lot more true to series than Clank's was.
It did fit Ratchet to a certain extent, but I can definitely see the criticism where some people say that it didn't hit as hard as it did in previous games. The shard gun is one of those weapons. Its finish wasn't that satisfying. It went boom like many of the other Ratchet weapons do, but it didn't go boom in the right way. I wasn't satisfied. It wasn't enough firepower.
Now, even though we have slightly different opinions of the weapons in this game, we both agree that none of these are as good as the mainline Insomniac weapons, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Some of them are good, but they're always in the shadow of the main series, unfortunately.
I 100% agree with you. I didn't use the shock rocket very much. It was probably mostly because of ammo. The dual lacerators were my go-to for my run-of-the-mill gun. If I just needed something to kill whatever it is I was facing, I would use the dual lacerators. I'm not bagging on the dual lacerators. They were a reliable weapon, and they worked pretty good. My most favorite, however, was the Plasma Whip, and you'll understand why in the prison minigames. If I was a warden, I would be the best warden ever.
Now, when it comes to the Cork segments, we're just going to talk about gameplay for these at the moment, but a little bit later in the video, we will talk about some of the hilarious story details around them. Cork's gameplay is very simple. He can punch really hard, and he has a blaster. You'll find that his punches do a lot more damage than the blaster does, which is very, very weird. I feel like it should be the other way around, but it's not. Cork has quite the right hook, I suppose. But yes, it doesn't really change much from that. What you will notice is that Cork does have some pretty satisfying bosses in this game. His bosses are some of the most challenging and honestly some of the most fun to get through, except for one very big exception. But anyways, Cork's gameplay can be summarized as simple but competent. It is definitely nothing special, but it's fun nonetheless. So, you know, it gets a pass, I guess.
One of my favorite minigames would have to be the Gadgetbots. It was cute and simple, but it still presented a challenge. They came with a basic command set that you could change at will. You could use this to solve various puzzles in the game. My favorite was charging the electrodes to open the doors. You basically had to arrange the Gadgetbots in such a way where they would all conduct electricity and positively charge the electrodes, and I thought that was really exciting. But that's not all you do with them. You'll find them useful in various little puzzles throughout the game. I think you're really going to enjoy it.
The Gadgetbots really offer some of the best puzzle solving that the game has to offer. I think people who like puzzles are definitely going to like playing as the Gadgetbots. Some of the instances where you're playing as the Gadgetbots are genuine head scratchers, and they're a lot of fun because of that. You know, they're not super hard or anything. I don't think they're anything you're going to spend hours on, but they do really require you to think, and I think that's what a lot of people like out of these sections. So they get a really good passing grade. There's also a lock-picking minigame that occurs, which isn't really bad or anything, but it's just kind of odd. It's basically a little bit like Tetris, which I don't really understand since this is a lock-picking minigame, but regardless, it appears a lot, so it's good that it's not really bad, but it's also not very good. It's just kind of there. Like, you might enjoy it the first few times, but it's definitely nothing legendary. It's nothing that's really going to sway your opinion that much, I don't think. And then there's the rhythm minigames, and These rhythm mini-games are probably one of the worst things in this game. They are so undeniably bad. There's no sound effects that play when you push the buttons, there's no rhythm to the music that actually lines up with the button inputs, and so these rhythm mini-games don't have any rhythm to them. You're just pushing a series of buttons and then watching random things happen on screen. I think that almost any dedicated rhythm game would put these sequences to shame, and I don't think these are good at all. I mean, some of them might have comedic scenes in them, but the rhythm game itself is just not good. There wasn't a good rhythm segment, in my opinion.
The vehicle segments are not my favorite. You have a choice between multiple types of challenges. It's not like you've never seen this before as far as platformers go, and usually with challenges like these they start and end pretty quickly, especially when you race against the clock. Despite how some challenges chugged along, ring collecting was my least favorite out of all of them. It didn't offer much of a challenge except for steering in a certain direction, picking the rings up. It was just more or less one after the other. You can only afford to miss a handful of rings. There's also a fairly high number of rings to collect, and if you lose, you have to start all over again. I don't see this segment of the game being very entertaining to the adult gamer. It seems like something that would keep a very young child busy.
All in all, when it comes to gameplay, Secret Agent Clank is very much a mixed bag. Clank has some updated gameplay that's fun at times, but most of his weapons arsenal isn't very good, with a couple exceptions. Ratchet is okay, but he's basically exactly the same as he was in Size Matters. The quirk segments aren't very complex, but they're actually really well designed in a lot of ways, especially the bosses. And of course, the mini-games are mostly okay, but a few of them are really, really bad, like the rhythm games. So, very much a mixed bag, very much a lot of good, a lot of bad. I think that a lot of people are kind of hard on this game and they act like it's the worst game ever made. It's certainly not the worst game ever made, I promise you that, but it's also not nearly as good as it could be. In a lot of ways, it's just very meh. Now, we already mentioned how it opened in the beginning of the video, but now getting into a little bit of the story, it's also, much like the gameplay, a little bit of a mixed bag. It certainly showcases the bond that Ratchet and Clank have built, with Clank immediately realizing that Ratchet is not himself when no one else did, but it also has a lot of moments that don't make sense, like how when Clank lands in Asianica, and there's a random bowl of water placed exactly where Clank lands after hopping out of his ship, which leads him to getting caught by one of the villains at a certain point. That is just cringe. I mean, look at this scene. Look how Clank lands his ship and then jumps out and then lands exactly in this small little container of water and somehow ends up getting caught this way.
Ah, Agent Clank, you seem to have an electric personality.
This is just so weird. This makes no sense at all, and yet this is one of the things that happen in the story.
There's no further explanation to this. Some of this feels rushed and in the end makes your perception of the story a little vague in places, but passable. Now, before I get too grim, I would like to note that there is a high point in the game, like the Quark segments. This time, High Impact was so in character with Captain Quark, portraying the well-known Quark to be a pompous, loudmouth narcissist that he is. He hails himself as the ultimate hero, even though most of the stories he's telling are complete nonsense. He tells all sorts of tall tales, but the funniest, cringiest, and weirdest one to date is where Quark claims to be able to clog massive leaks with his left butt cheek. That's both weird and funny, and so Quark-like. His back must be sore. After all, this blowback carries the comedy in this adventure. Take a look at the scene in question.
I swam right under it and plugged the leak with just my left butt cheek.
Then, of course, Ratchet's role in the story is actually not bad. I mean, Ratchet getting into prison fights isn't exactly out of character. The guy usually carries enough ammunition for World War III, so it makes sense he'd be up to the challenge. But the comedy in this game sometimes is a little bit cringy. I think a lot of times you'll probably end up getting laughs just because of how dumb the comedy is, and you'll be laughing at literally how stupid the jokes are, but some of them are genuinely clever. Like many other things in this game, the comedy is very much a mixed bag, but I think at the end of the day you will end up laughing quite a bit, so I guess it's kinda doing its job.
Ratchet's segments do get out there at times, like when a fight breaks out in the prison showers and Ratchet's towel falls off. leaving you to play as a nude Ratchet with a sensor block. What I believe is going on with this is that High Impact was going for that brand of edgy comedy we've seen in the 80s and 90s. I'm all for throwbacks, but please don't lay it on it too thick. I don't even want to know what kind of art has been made of this, but I'm sure it's uncomfortable. Secret Agent Clank's story is okay if you don't take it too seriously, but there are moments that could have been more fleshed out in its creative execution. It almost feels like High Impact was saving all their energy for the latter parts of the game, which felt the most like Ratchet and Clank. If you're willing to take a step back and enjoy this game for what it is and laugh, then it does pretty well for itself, for the most part. But if you expect a solid game, like what you would get in the original Zoniac games, you'll be disappointed.
Although there is one thing I do want to talk about before we wrap up this review, and a little bit of a spoiler warning. I'm going to give you a few minutes to click off the video if you don't want in-game content to be spoiled. Okay, now that you've been warned, the final battle. The final battle is actually great. In fact, it's one of the better final battles in the entire series. It has a good challenge level and it's extremely well paced. I found this to be one of the best gameplay segments of the entire game, although there were other high points like the segment that occurs just before the final battle. I kept feeling like the gameplay got better as the game went on. It never got to be on par with the best games in the series, but I had a pretty decent amount of fun at times, and one of those times that I had the most fun was with the final battle. I think if you play the game and stick with it to the end, you'll see what I mean. This is a true to form Ratchet & Clank final battle. I had a lot of fun with it. And now some quick discussion about the music. The music is just kind of there, to be honest. It's not really that good, but it's also not horrible. It's very generic and spy movie-like most of the time, and it serves its purpose okay for setting the mood, but that's really it. I doubt that you'll be looking up this game's soundtrack on YouTube to listen to it while you're doing paperwork or something. I mean, if you do, then that's good. Everyone has their own tastes, but I highly doubt that most people are going to be listening to this game's music just for the heck of it. I think that it's basically just a mood setter, and that's really all there is to say about it.
I would definitely not be looking up this music on YouTube, and I definitely won't be drawing to it either. Secret Agent Clank is not a perfect game, but there are times when it really does shine. Especially in the latter parts of the game, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I do suggest picking this game up because it's really worth it to me for you to see the end parts of it, especially if you're a really big Ratchet & Clank fan. A bystander probably wouldn't care because there's not enough there, but if you miss Ratchet & Clank and you want to fill that Ratchet & Clank shaped hole in your heart while you wait for the new game to come out, please give this a look. If you can get past all the bad parts, you can actually have fun. It's only $10 to buy, and it's free to play on PS Plus Premium. So, considering the price is cheaper than a fast food run, I'd say go for it, especially if you miss Ratchet & Clank.
Much like we stated earlier, I think it's important to remember that this is a game that you can't really take too seriously. This is a game that is fun if you are a Ratchet & Clank fan, although it does have a lot of problems. Its problems don't outweigh its strengths, in my opinion. I think despite the fact that it's still a very flawed game, it's still very fun at the end of the day. It's not as good as other Ratchet & Clank games, obviously, but I still think that there's enough fun to be had to say that it's generally a pretty good game. With that being said, it's a game that you can't take too seriously. You have to be able to just let loose and kind of enjoy this game for what it is, warts and all. And if you can do that, then I think that you'll get a pretty good amount of fun out of it. And just so you know, I do fully understand the problems that some people have with this game, but I feel like a lot of reviewers kind of blow problems that a lot of people wouldn't really notice out of proportion. So I'm trying to come at this from a more rounded perspective and just kind of talk about this in terms that I think is going to be more relatable to the average gamer and someone that just really likes Ratchet & Clank and wants to play the next chapter in the series. This game is not perfect by any means, and there's a lot to complain about, but I also think that it has enough in the tank to give the average player some enjoyment. That's just my 2 cents, and I'm sure it's a very controversial 2 cents for some people, but let us know what you think in the comments. Also, if you're a trophy hunter, you'll be glad to know that this new version of the game has a trophy list, because every game on modern PlayStation has a trophy list, which is cool. So if you want to get another Ratchet & Clank Platinum, you'll be able to do that. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like our content, be sure to keep commenting and liking after you've subscribed, because we really like to hear your feedback, 1, and 2, it really helps us out. So yeah, just keep doing that, okay? I mean, Ratchet would do it. He would.
Yeah, Ratchet, if you want to come on here and tell us what you think about everything, don't be shy. We'd love to hear from you. He's one cool cat. You guys have a good day now.
Thank you.